Hello everyone and welcome back. This is the Level Up English podcast, the best place to come to practice the British accent, learn about the English language and culture, and much more as well with me, your host, Michael Lavers. I am so happy to be back because it's been a few weeks since I've recorded an episode, and that's because I've been away on a trip. The episodes you saw in the last weeks before this one, previously, were ones that I had pre-recorded, and maybe you didn't even realize. Very sneaky of me, right? So I had a few weeks break from recording, and to be totally honest, I'm feeling a little bit jet lagged. We can use this as an adjective, to be jet lagged, or a noun, like I have jet lag. I have jet lag. And if you don't know, maybe you haven't taken a long distance flight before, this is when you fly across the world over many time zones and your body can't really get used to it. So that's how I feel today. I'm feeling quite tired. My brain and my body is still a little bit confused as to what time it was. And I guess I'll explain more in just a second, but basically I flew from, let's say, Europe. I'll keep it a bit mysterious for now. I flew from Europe to Thailand and went around 6 hours forward. And, now when I'm recording this, it's morning time. But in the time that I'm used to, it's about 3 o'clock in the morning. That's what my body thinks it is. So it's very confusing. You'll have to excuse me if my brain is not fully back to normal yet. But yeah, basically this episode is going to be a very casual one. So if you're a fan of the more casual, chatty episodes, then this might be good for you, where, don't expect too much. I'm just going to be sharing what I've been going through recently, what's happened, and maybe there'll be some interesting things we can learn along the way as well. And just a quick reminder, there's always going to be bonus materials up for members. So if you become a member at Level Up English, you can get transcripts, quizzes to help you learn the new vocab from these episodes. Obviously other things as well, like group classes and other courses, many things over there. So if that's interesting, you can click or tap the link in your podcast description that says become a member or find out more. And by the way, if you do like these kind of episodes, the more casual ones, then you might also like my private podcast where I have over 100 episodes where I'm kind of talking very chattily, that's not quite a word, but I'm talking very casually, we could say. And it's very similar to how this one will be, I think, with me being a little bit more casual, a little bit weird at some points and making mistakes, that kind of stuff. But yeah, so basically today, this is what I want to talk about. I want to talk about my big trip that I have just come back from. I haven't been back in this home for about 2 months, and it's really nice, but also very strange to be back again. So first I went to the UK for a few weeks, which was really nice, going back home in the summer. Beautiful hot weather, just perfect temperature. Everyone was complaining about how hot it was. It was like 30 degrees on some days. They were saying, oh, it's so hot. And I was thinking, that's not hot. You don't know how it is, being used to the weather here in Thailand. But I didn't really say that because that's a bit obnoxious, a little bit annoying. So I just kept it to myself. But yeah, I had a nice few weeks in the UK doing a lot of traveling actually. And I was having this mindset of viewing my home country like almost just like a travel destination. And I think this is something that we can all do no matter where we live. We can have the traveler's mindset in our home, in our home country. So wherever you live, go outside, explore new places and view your area from an outsider's perspective. And it makes things so much more fun and enjoyable. And I was doing that a lot. It's much easier to do that when you haven't been home for a while. And yeah, actually, this was the longest I have ever spent outside of the UK in one go. So I really had some strong feelings of reverse culture shock. And I do have some ideas to talk about this more in a future episode. It will take some planning, but I have a lot of insights about the UK that I never really realized before I left. So I'm going to be talking about that in the future. I think that could be a really fun one. But for now, I just want to talk about my Europe trip. So after the UK, I traveled through Europe a little bit. And the reason for doing this was that there were a few reasons actually, but one of them was just because I feel like I don't know Europe as well as I would like to. So, Europe is my home continent, not my home country, but my home continent. It's the region where I'm from. And yet there's so many places in Europe that I really haven't been to, and many, many countries that I still haven't been to. The biggest surprise for many people is I'm from England, but I've never been to Ireland. And there are flight tickets for like £10-20. So there's no reason why I shouldn't go there, really. It's just I haven't had the time. I haven't made the time. So that's a shocking one for me as well, actually. But I kind of felt like at this point I've been to quite a few places around Asia. And I feel like I've been to more places in Asia than Europe. And I felt quite ashamed of that. So I wanted to make a change. By the way, actually, before I go any further, if you do want to watch the video version of this episode on YouTube, I will be putting some photos and some videos from my trip up over my face, up on the video. So if you want to, you can see and have some kind of visual, visual guide or visual elements to look at as well. But yeah, so basically what I did is I decided to take a train from London all the way to Istanbul in Turkey. That was my goal. And then from Turkey to fly back to Bangkok. It turns out it wasn't really cheaper. The price from Turkey to Bangkok was about the same as from London, which is a shame. But at least it's not more expensive. However, one benefit that was really good is, of course, it's a much shorter flight. Rather than like 10 or 11 hours, it's closer to 6 or 7 hours, which is much more manageable, if you ask me. So I thought I could kind of go over some of my trip feelings and what happened on the trip, some lessons I took away, and also my thoughts about each place I went to. It could be interesting. So think of this as good listening practice, and maybe it might inspire you to travel to these places as well, or maybe not, if I didn't enjoy a place so much. But one more reason why I wanted to try this adventure is because I learnt about a rail pass that I didn't really know existed until this year, which is called the Interrail pass. But basically, this is a pass where you can just buy one ticket and you can take almost any train in all of Europe for a specified number of days. So it depends how often you will take the train, but it can be cheaper than buying lots of separate tickets, which is really nice. So that was a really nice thing to do, I think. It's a fun idea. And what I did is, let's go from the beginning. I took the Eurostar on my own for the first time from London to Paris. I think many of you will know, but if you don't know, there is a train that goes directly from London to Paris under the English Channel, under the sea, which is really cool to think about. And I don't know, I think this is such a cool idea, it's such a cool thing, and I feel like, I don't know, people don't talk about it enough. People don't appreciate it enough. I don't know many people who take the Eurostar, like personally, to go to Europe. And I suppose it's because flights are so cheap compared to trains quite often, but I thought it was nice. It was a good idea, and yeah, it was quite fun. Obviously, most of the journey is dark because you're under the water, and it's unfortunately not a glass tunnel where you can see all the fish like you might imagine as a child, but it's just a dark tunnel, so that bit's not so interesting. But what I really appreciated is seeing the transition of scenery in France, but also all of Europe, much more slowly. So that was cool to kind of see this English countryside disappear underground, and then when you come up, it's a little bit different. The north of France is quite similar to the south of the UK. The countryside looks quite similar, but I think the north of France is much flatter than the UK, and the roads are straighter and things like that. So there are some differences that stand out to me, and that was really cool to see. And as you approach Paris, of course, things get more built up, which means more urban, more buildings. So that was interesting, but it wasn't, an amazing. It was just a very ordinary experience. It wasn't like really life changing. So don't have your expectations too high for the Eurostar train. But anyway, so I was only in Paris for basically one day because it was exactly when the Olympics were happening. And I booked my trip kind of by accident at this time because I don't know anything about the Olympics. So it was just a coincidence that it happened. It happened to line up, which means to match with when the Olympics were taking place. So I was a bit nervous about it. It actually wasn't too bad. The central areas closer to the Eiffel Tower were, of course, busier. But most of the city wasn't that busy. It wasn't too bad. And I think it's because most tourists will avoid going during the Olympics, I guess, right? But I didn't spend much time in Paris. I had a really long walk around. I did like a 5 or 6 hour walk around Paris because I wanted to see as much as I could and get a feel for the different areas. And I definitely had a preconception or an idea. So preconception is like an idea that you have before you go somewhere or before you do something. Pre means before, conception means idea or thought. So I had a preconception that people would be quite rude in Paris because that's what they say. They say that people who live in Paris are quite rude, especially when you don't speak French. So I went there really nervous because I don't really speak any French. So I was very nervous about offending someone or someone getting mad at me, something like that. I didn't want any negative experiences like that. So I did have one moment where I went to a restaurant to get lunch, and I said in French, I know some basic French. I said, "Do you speak English?" And she said, "Sorry, what?" And I switched to English and I said, "Do you speak English?" And she said, "Oh yes, of course, of course." Like, it's a very obvious question. Of course, everyone speaks English in Paris. And I think I made some comment like, "Oh, I'm sorry, my French is not so good. I'm very sorry." And she's like, "No, your French is very good." And there was like this awkward moment where I said, "Well, you couldn't understand me though, right?" And she kind of just like awkwardly laughed when I pointed out her white lie. Remember, white lie is a lie that you tell someone to make them feel better about themselves. So it was quite obvious that she was lying about my good French because she couldn't understand me. But I thought that was a bit funny, but it definitely felt a little bit bad that what I thought was quite basic French was not understandable by this lady. So if that happens to you, I know how you feel in English. I have to say, so in this episode, I think I'm going to be brutally honest with how I felt in each place. When it came to Paris, I have a lot of... I'm very reluctant, hesitant to say it, but I have a lot of negative things to say about Paris. I'm really sorry to French people or to people in Paris, but I was kind of comparing it to London because I think there's a lot of similarities between Paris and London. But in terms of the city itself, I found Paris a little bit more boring. Of course, there is a lot of history and cool architecture, but a lot of the buildings are like the same height, which I think looks a little bit boring. It's very flat, whereas London, you've got really tall buildings and then really short buildings. And I think that variation, that difference in height makes it quite interesting, visually interesting. in London, you also have a really nice contrast between modern skyscrapers and 1,000-year-old churches side by side. And I love that contrast where you can see the best of both worlds, right? The best of both situations. And again, I only had one day in Paris, but my experience walking around the center was that most of it was old, which is great if you like that, but there wasn't really much like, I don't know, maybe this seems like a weird complaint to have, but all of the buildings looked very similar. They were all around the same age, I guess, all the same height. There wasn't much variation, which was a little bit boring, because when you're walking around, you're not seeing as much change as you might like. So I don't know, maybe that's a weird critique, but one thing that I think is a fair critique is that, it's not too dissimilar to London, but Paris was quite dirty. There was a lot of rubbish everywhere. It was quite dirty. And there was the smell of pee, the smell of urine everywhere. And I don't quite know why, but that really wasn't very pleasant. Although one interesting thing, maybe it's connected, is every morning, it seems, they hose down the streets, which means they clean the streets with water every morning. And I don't think I've ever seen that happen in another country before. I know it happens in areas with clubs where people are being sick on the street and stuff like that. But I woke up quite early one morning and there were people with hoses and machines hosing down all the streets with all this water. And maybe that's connected to the pee problem. I don't know. But yeah, that was very interesting. I don't know. Is that a good thing? I imagine like a lot of shops would get covered in dirt from all the splash of the water. But yeah, interesting. But yeah, I don't have too much more to say about Paris, but that was it. My next stop on the journey was Munich in Germany. I took the train from Paris down to Munich, and it took a few hours, but it wasn't very long. It wasn't a super comfortable journey because I was sat next to someone who smelled very bad. I'm very sorry to that person, but I was trying to hold my breath for the whole journey. And it's these kind of things on trains. Like, you imagine train journeys through Europe, so romantic, so beautiful, but things like this make it worse. I sometimes wish that you could reserve 2 seats. That would be really nice if you could reserve 2 seats. So you make sure the one next to you is free, but maybe that's a bit selfish. I don't know. But anyway, when I got to Munich, I was feeling a little bit down. I think sad is too strong, but down is a little bit less bad than sad. You've got down, then you've got sad, and then you've got depressed. I was a bit down though because Paris was a bit underwhelming. I had been to Paris before, maybe when I was a child, but not in my adult life. And yeah, I was kind of expecting more, I suppose. I was expecting more. It was a bit disappointing. But when I got to Munich, this is when things turned around. Munich is, of course, not a capital city, so maybe this is partly why I liked it more. It was very interesting, different areas. It was much less grid-like as well. I think that's a theme with a lot of the places I don't like, is they're laid out in like a grid, like a lot of American cities where the roads are very straight. They go like up, then left, then right. If you look at the city from above, it looks like lots of squares. It's not very interesting. Whereas if you look at towns or cities in the UK, they're usually lots of curves and little tiny roads and things like that, which I really like, maybe because I'm used to it. And I think Munich was a little bit more like that, slightly less griddy, we could say, less like a grid. A grid is like a table in like a maths textbook, for example. Yeah, Munich was great. There was a lot to see. You could cycle everywhere. I think probably it's the best city I've ever been to for cycling. Cycle lanes everywhere. I feel like German people will love following the rules. So you never see, people walking in the cycle lanes like you do in other places, which I really appreciate. And yeah, cycling, even though it's I think right, it's a different side of the road to the UK. It was still very easy to work out the rules. Lots of parks, lots of history, lots of really nice cafes. I really, really loved Munich, so I'd highly recommend visiting Munich. And I do think as well, having a really nice accommodation or hotel is very helpful. In Paris, mine was not so nice. It was really hot and noisy, and it was falling apart, basically. But in Munich, I had a really nice modern hotel, very cheap, actually, compared to France as well, compared to Paris. And yeah, great hotel. So I think having somewhere nice to go back and rest at the end of the day really makes a big difference in your trip. So that's something I'm going to be thinking about more on future trips as well. After a couple days in Munich, again, very short trip, I then took the train to Vienna. And this was exciting because this is a whole new country for me. I had never been to Austria before. And notice I used there the past perfect tense. I had never been, rather than I did not go. I had never been to Austria. So that means before that moment, I didn't go. But after that moment, of course, I had been. I did go. So that's why we're using past perfect, because it was true before this past situation. Hopefully that makes sense. If you're confused about past perfect, I do have a whole episode on that, which I've done here on the podcast before. But yeah, so Vienna, I actually spent a couple extra days here because I just had a feeling that Vienna would be nice. I've heard so much about Vienna, and I just imagined it would be good. I kind of thought to myself, will it live up to the hype? It's a really good expression we can learn. Hype is a kind of casual word, HYPE, and it kind of means the excitement that people have for a place or the good words people use to describe something. I'll put it up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube as well. And live up to means to be as good as what people say. So if something lives up to the hype, that means it's as good or better than what people say about it. And I was hoping to see if it would live up to the hype. I've heard a lot of hype, a lot of excitement about Vienna, and I wanted to see for myself. So I'll tell you that the ending now is that I'm kind of afraid I'm going to appear to come off as a really negative, complaining kind of person today. But at the end, I'm going to explain why I think I have these negative views. I'm going to get to that later. But I would say Vienna did not live up to the hype for me, which means it was a little bit worse than I expected. I did do some cycling in Vienna. It was okay for cycling. It wasn't as good as Munich, but of course Vienna is a much bigger city. You can cycle along the Danube, the river. I think it's the second longest river in Europe, the longest in Western Europe. And there are cycle lanes on both sides of the river here, and you can cycle along. A very beautiful area. People go swimming in the river as well because it's so clean, I suppose. Something that you couldn't do here in Bangkok. And yeah, really beautiful. So that was really nice. I think that was good. There were a lot of tourists there, which I can't really complain about because I was also one of them. But yeah, it's very busy with tourists in the centre, which always, it's let's be honest, it's never a good feeling, right? Where everyone's crowded around taking photos, and it just kind of takes you out of the moment in some way. And there were a lot of really interesting old buildings and historical monuments and things like that. But I don't know. In the moment, I wasn't really feeling it. I suppose when there's a lot of tourists in a place, I try my best to avoid it. So I didn't really spend too much time looking around those areas because it's just too busy, honestly. And one of my biggest gripes, which is like annoyances, my biggest gripe with Vienna and maybe Austria, is from what I could tell, and I researched it as well, it basically closes on the weekend. I think a lot of shops are open like Saturday morning, and then like lunchtime Saturday, everything closes until Monday morning, including like supermarkets, which I think the reason they do this is for a better work-life balance for the employees. So you could argue it's a good thing, but I don't know. To me, it seems very strange when so many people work from Monday to Friday and you want to go shopping on the weekend and you only have a few hours in the morning to go shopping. And I was visiting, of course, only for a couple days on the weekend, and I basically couldn't really get much food because all the supermarkets were closed. That was really, really shocking to me. Very inconvenient, but I guess that's a good or bad thing depending on your point of view. But I just felt like if you're visiting Vienna on the weekend, it kind of feels like the only people you will see are tourists. It's very weird feeling. I didn't really enjoy that part. But anyway, I've got two more places. I won't be too long on these next two. Next, I went to Budapest, Hungary, another new country for me. I was very excited to see another new place in Europe, and it was pretty good. I think again I had about 2 days there, but I spent one day working quite a lot. But I went on a free walking tour in Budapest, and I was able to learn a lot about the history and stuff like that. And yeah, there was a lot to learn, and I can imagine staying longer there and learning more. I'll tell you my negative right away, though. This is a really weird one, but how can I put this delicately? How can I put it lightly? There was a lot of, I'll just say it, a lot of poop everywhere. What I think was human feces. So feces is the more kind of scientific or the polite way to say poop. Poop is a bit more silly and fun. Feces sounds a bit more scientific and formal and less disgusting, I would say. But yeah, again, I don't know why, but everywhere I went, like parks and I don't know, just different places, I saw lots and lots of feces, which was really disgusting, of course. And I don't know, maybe it's just a coincidence, but that was quite shocking. I didn't really expect to find that in the middle of Europe, in basically Central Europe, in a fairly touristic city. That was surprising and quite disgusting, of course, as well. So I learnt not to stray from the path. So if I'm going in a park, I would stay on the main footpath and not go onto the grass, because that's where things get a little bit risky. But I suppose actually one possibility for this is the lack of free toilets. And I think this is a problem throughout a lot of European cities and countries. In the UK, it's kind of hit or miss, which means it depends where you go. There are many places in the UK where you have to pay for public toilets. But I think these days it's getting much better. There are certain places like train stations where they usually have free toilets, which is a really nice tip if you're desperate and you need to go in London. Go to a train station, a big train station, and they'll have a free toilet for you. But in Europe, I really never found a free toilet. They're always paid for. And sometimes it's like €1. €1 to go to the bathroom. It's crazy, especially if you're homeless. That's just not possible. So maybe that's why a lot of people were going toilet outside, because, we're all human. You have to go. And I do feel strongly that the price for toilets should be paid for by our taxes. I think that would be a much better solution. But yeah, anyway. So there's that. But I will say, let's say a nice thing now. Let's say a good thing. There were lots of places to explore. Quite beautiful. Lots of really beautiful buildings. The cathedral, the big cathedral, was really beautiful in Budapest. Very touristy, but very beautiful. And more personally, I was super happy because it was the first time of my trip where I had a washing machine in my apartment, because I was staying in hotels before, and I was, because I travel so minimally, I bring a limited number of clothes on my trips. So that means I have to wash a lot of my clothes in the sink with some soap, which is not ideal. It's not great, and it's just a bit of a pain as well. So I was super happy to finally have a washing machine where I could give my clothes a good proper wash. So that's something nice for me. So it's the little things that make you happy, right? I also found that, now we're getting further away from Western Europe. I noticed the culture was changing a little bit. There was more little things that were different that I wasn't used to, which makes it more interesting for me. So I kind of learned that the further I get away from my home, the more interesting places get. There's a lot more to learn, I find. My next place was Bucharest in Romania, another new country. I was happy to tick off all these new countries, a lot in kind of Eastern Europe as well. So Romania, I didn't really know much about it. I was kind of interested to see what it would be like. One of the cool things I did in Romania is I took a sleeper train, because Romania is quite far from Hungary. Well, from the capital. It's quite a big country. So there's a lot of Romania to travel across to get to the capital. And in order to do that, you need a sleeper train. It takes about 15 hours by train. If you have the rail pass, you can buy a reservation for about $3 for your seat. But sitting in a seat for 15 hours overnight is not very comfortable. I don't like the idea of that. So I splashed out, which means I spent a lot of money. I splashed out on a private cabin here. A private cabin, by the way, is about $100. So for me, that was totally worth it. There are different options, like you could share a cabin with 4 people or 6 people. But I don't know, I feel like, I don't remember how much it was. Maybe it's like $25 to share with 4 people. But for me, it's so worth it to spend more to have the private cabin. And it's also like I don't know if it is a once in a lifetime experience, but it's definitely a very unique experience that maybe I'll do it again, but it's not going to happen many times in my life. So I feel like I was justified spending that money and not sharing a tiny cabin with a bunch of noisy, snoring strangers. So I think it was the right choice to do that for sure. However, it was a bit uncomfortable. Again, we like to have this idea that train travel is romantic and peaceful and beautiful and calm. But there were a lot of problems. Like my bathroom, there were things not working in the bathroom. Apparently, the staff told me it wasn't working. They never came back again to fix it. The light was on all night. I don't think there was a switch to turn off the light. So very hard to sleep with the light on all night. It was very noisy on the train. And every few minutes, the train would go beep, beep. And, honk the horn, whatever it's called on a train. Very shaky, surprisingly, too. I was getting like rocked around, bumped around all night with the movement of the train. So it was very, very hard to sleep. I was waking up maybe every hour. I was very tired in the morning. It wasn't a very comfortable sleep. And of course, well, maybe not of course, but I can let you know, it's not really possible to sleep until about 1 a.m. because at about midnight or 1 a.m. is when you cross the border into Romania. And because Romania is not in the Schengen zone, I think that's the reason, so it's not in that visa-free area. Because of that reason, you need to see the border security at the border, right? Give your passport. So how this happens is you stay inside your cabin or you stay in your seat and the border police come through the train and check everyone's passport and make sure there's no one illegally traveling, right? So I knew this was going to happen because I did some research beforehand. I imagine if you didn't know about this, this would be a really scary way to wake up at midnight in your underwear, police knocking on your door, very scary, but I knew this was going to happen, so I was awake. When we stopped, I opened my door of the cabin with my passport ready. I was really prepared. I'm sure they loved me for that. And that was fine. The police looked at my passport and then moved on, no problem. But yeah, just because of that, I couldn't really sleep until 1 a.m. So that's another thing that was a bit annoying. However, as I'm going to put on the YouTube video now, I did wake up to a beautiful sunrise over the mountains of Romania and the fields with beautiful meadows of yellow flowers. And that was really nice. I was very tired, and I had no coffee or anything like that to wake me up. But that was still very nice to just sit there and snuggle up in my bed with my sheets over me to keep me warm while watching the Romanian countryside pass me by. So even though it wasn't a super comfortable experience, I will remember that moment, I think, for a while. So that's really nice. When it comes to Romania itself, I noticed it was quite different from the rest of Europe. There was a lot more, I think, Eastern influences, like from the Soviet Union back in the day and stuff like that. Definitely different from other places I'd been before. It also had a very strange feeling to it. Like, it didn't feel like a capital city. It kind of felt quite empty in some ways. Like, a lot of streets I was walking down were just totally empty. Even in the center, there weren't that many people. It just wasn't very busy, and I was quite surprised at that. It just felt very strange. Unfortunately, there was a lot of poverty everywhere. Whenever I would go to a park, I would see lots of homeless people searching through bins for food and stuff like that. So that's really sad to see. That's always very sad, and it's just not good. So that's kind of a shame. Another thing I'm going to complain about are the roads. I'm a big fan of pedestrian-friendly cities, which is, I think, why I loved Munich. It's quite easy to get around as a pedestrian. By the way, pedestrian basically means walking person. It means someone who is not in a car. An easy way to remember that is PED means feet. So you might often see words that have a Greek origin with PED, and it's usually related to feet, right? Like pedal on the bicycle, PED, ped, right? So it's very common for feet. But yes, a pedestrian, person who's walking on their feet. Bucharest wasn't very pedestrian friendly, which means the roads were very wide, like really, really, really big roads. So definitely easier for driving. If you like driving, it's maybe a great place to go. And often, like, when you want to cross the road, you would have to go through like 5 or 6 different traffic lights, different crossings to cross one junction, one intersection. And that was really annoying. It took so long. Like, I can see where I want to go. It's 50 meters away, but there's like so many roads in the way, and it takes like 10 minutes to cross all the roads. And that's really annoying. I think the UK is much, much better for that. They tend to put the pedestrian crossings in places that don't disrupt traffic too much, and also in places where you can cross much more quickly, which is really nice. So yeah, a few bad things, but to be honest, at this point, I just wasn't really feeling it. I wasn't enjoying the trip as much as I thought I would. And so instead of continuing to Bulgaria and then Turkey, I actually decided to cut my trip short. Here's a good expression here, to cut short. Cut short means to, usually like a trip or a plan, to make it shorter than you planned previously. So I cut my trip short, and I went back to Thailand 1 week earlier. And instead of going to Bulgaria and Turkey, I got a flight directly from Romania back to Thailand. And when I kind of added everything together, it seemed like the right decision to make that. So first of all, throughout my trip, I honestly wasn't enjoying it as much as I expected, which was a real shame. But I think one big factor is that I was away from Thailand for too long. I really missed Thailand. I think 1 month could be possible, but 2 months, it's too long. So I was really sad to be away for that long, and that was very difficult for me. On the plus side, I suppose it is a great way to find a new appreciation for your life. If you really start to take something for granted, which means you're no longer appreciating something fully, then take a break. Whether it's a relationship or a place or an object or a hobby, take a break from that thing for a while, and then you might find that you really, really miss it, and you will learn to appreciate it more. And now that I'm back in Thailand, I can definitely say for sure I do appreciate being here so much more than I did a few months ago. Another thing that I found very very helpful for my decision making, was that it was actually cheaper. I saved money by coming back earlier. So I cancelled my old flight, I cancelled the accommodation, and I bought a new flight. And in the end, I got money back. So I actually earned money from that decision, which was really nice. It was a nice bonus as well. And I think just a lot of the trip was planned in such a way that didn't take my own personality into account. So this is a really good takeaway for me, and I think for everyone, when it comes to planning a trip or planning something, anything, is to not plan based on what you think you should do, but plan based on who you are and what you like and what you want to do. Right? So I was planning all of these trips to these capital cities, and my idea was that if I like it, I can come back in the future and spend more time in that country. But in hindsight, which means looking back on that moment, looking back on the past, I just think I'm not really the kind of person who enjoys big city travel. I'm not the kind of person who enjoys seeing temples and churches and tourist spots. It's not really my cup of tea. It's not what I like. I much prefer going deeper into the culture, or maybe exploring the countryside, going to some meetup groups. I much prefer meeting people rather than seeing places as well. So I think we're all different, right? And I really should have thought more carefully about my own preferences. That was my mistake. And also my work situation, I found because I was working so much, it really limited my time from place to place. And that was quite hard as well. Like editing podcasts and stuff like that. It was hard to manage everything with such a short time in each place. So that wasn't too easy. So I definitely felt like I made the right decision coming back. I'm very happy to be back now, even though I'm still fairly jet lagged. But yes. So before we end, I want to summarize this with a few takeaways, a few lessons basically that I've learned from this experience. One thing I learned was, one thing that I improved on was my anxiety, or overcoming my anxiety about taking trains in Europe. I was quite scared to take a train in Europe and do something a bit new. You know, I feel like that was a nice confidence booster to do that. So this is a nice reminder for everyone. If there's something you find a little bit scary, but maybe you want to try it, just do it. And once you've done it, you will no longer be scared. So the more things you do, the less things there are in life that cause you anxiety or fear. And that's a really nice power to have, isn't it? So that's good. Here's another really important lesson that I took away. And this is the idea that future Michael will be different and he'll be ready for this trip. So what I mean by that is, I feel like this is something we all do. When we're planning something in the future, we like to think that version of me will be different to who I am now. And the reality is, it's more likely that you're very similar. You're not that different. And I think this goes for travel. It goes for saying yes to meetings, things with other people, things like meeting up with friends, going to events. And I think a nice reminder is, if you wouldn't do it right now, you probably wouldn't do it in the future either. So if someone asks you, hey, can you help me move house next Saturday? You might say, oh yes, of course, no problem. But then you wouldn't do it today. So next Saturday, you'll feel the same as you do today. So does that make sense? Right? Don't expect that you're going to be so different in the future, because you'll probably be the same and you'll regret saying yes to something. So that's one mistake that I made, is that I wasn't really excited about the trip, but I expected that I would be later on. And that didn't really happen. As I said just now, I also learnt that travel needs to be planned around your individual and unique personality and interests. So that's something that's really important to take into account. I think for me in the future that short trips are just too stressful. I would much prefer to take a little bit of a longer time in each place rather than just 2 days in each place. I would like to spend a week or 2 weeks in one place and then move on. And that would allow me to really understand the feel of a place and take some day trips around as well. And yeah, I think one example of that is on my walking tour in Budapest. It was a good tour, but I only had one full day in Budapest. So I felt quite impatient because the tour was wasting my time. I wanted to do stuff on my own, and that took like half of my day. If I had more time, it would be okay, right? There's like a pressure that you have on a shorter trip to really make the most of every day, regardless of how you feel, which isn't always healthy. So I think from now on in the future, I might choose to visit a capital city for like 1 day or even less than 1 day, and then venture out, which means explore to venture out to more remote areas like countryside or mountains or seaside, somewhere more natural, more beautiful. I think that would be more my style, my cup of tea. So I do see the city, but I'm not staying there for too long. That's one of my takeaways. So that's basically, I don't really have any kind of crazy stories or adventures to share with you. It was honestly a somewhat boring trip in many ways. It was nice to see different places, but again, because it was so quick, one day, moving on every day. It was so quick, I didn't really have time to have any like crazy things happen or interesting things happen. It was just kind of about surviving each day at a time and trying to get some work done. It was quite stressful. So as you might be able to tell, I'm very happy and relaxed to be back. So there we have it. I guess that was a very long ramble about my trip, but I thought I'd just share that. It's what's on my mind. So let me know what you think. If you like these rambly, chatty episodes, let me know. If not, that's totally fine. I understand. But I hope you got something from it anyway. I hope you enjoyed hearing about it, or maybe you learned something new. Or if nothing else, you had some listening practice for your English. I think I'm just going to end with a quote now. I'm going to get to some reviews next week, but this week let's just do a quote and then we'll finish up. And this quote is from Yasmina Kadra. And it's about trains. Life is a train that stops at no stations. You either jump aboard or stand on the platform and watch as it passes. What does that mean to you? Will you jump on the train of life, or will you watch life pass you by? That's a nice metaphor there, a nice comparison. Okay, well, thank you for listening again to my very chatty episode. Hope you enjoyed it, hanging out with me, and I will see you next week with something a little bit more regular, if you prefer that. So thank you, and see you then. You have been listening to the Level Up English podcast. If you would like to leave a question to be answered on a future episode, then please go to levelupenglish.school/podcast. That's levelupenglish.school/podcast. And I'll answer your question on a future episode. Thanks for listening.